This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Marissa Melton. 2 days after his mother's death propelled him to the British throne, King Charles III has been officially proclaimed Britain's monarch. AP correspondent Karen Chamas has more.
Realizing the weight of his new role, Charles spoke of the heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed on to him. The accession ceremony is one step in the ceremonial process of Charles being introduced as king to the nation. The room inside St James's Palace, where the meeting of the Accession Council took place, was filled with senior politicians. They met without Charles officially confirming his title, King Charles III. The king then joined them, delivering a declaration on his mother's passing and his new duties as monarch. Karen Chamas, London.
Ukraine announced major advancements in a strategic military counteroffensive against Russian forces Saturday, retaking a vital city and causing thousands of Russian soldiers to retreat from territory in northeastern Ukraine that they'd held since the start of the war in late February. Ukrainian forces reported Saturday that they'd gained control of Izium and pushed Russian soldiers across the Oskil River. Russia's defense ministry confirmed it had pulled its forces out of Izium, claiming the move was planned. Reports of the claims could not be independently verified. Western military analysts say if the advances are confirmed, it would put the Ukrainians in control of a main railway that Moscow uses to supply thousands of troops in eastern Ukraine. 5 Hong Kong speech therapists were sentenced to 19 months each in prison on Saturday after being found guilty on sedition charges for a series of children's books that were deemed anti-government. The books featured cartoons of sheep that were trying to repel wolves from their village. VOA News. Albania's government says it has suffered a renewed cyber attack and says Iran is likely behind it. Tirana also accuses Iran of an earlier assault on its digital systems. On Wednesday, it cut diplomatic ties with Iran over the attacks. The U.S. announced sanctions on Friday on Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security and its minister over Tehran's alleged involvement. The Islamic Republic has also been targeted by cyber attacks, most notably in 2010, when a virus believed to have been engineered by Israel and the United States infected its nuclear program. Nearly 2 decades after his capture in Pakistan, the self-described mastermind of the September 11th terror attacks is still in a legal limbo. AP correspondent Julie Walker has more.
As of the 21st anniversary of the terror attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 4 other men accused of 9/11-related crimes sit in detention in Guantanamo Bay. Their military tribunals constantly postponed. Another disappointment for relatives of the nearly 3,000 killed, like Eddie Bracken, whose sister Lucy Fishman died in the Twin Towers.
The whole world is looking at us and saying, what are they doing after all this time?
Gordon Haberman lost his daughter, Andrea, and says he hopes to live to see the outcome.
I promised her I would follow this through to the end.
One attorney involved in the case says they're attempting to reach an agreement avoiding a trial. Julie Walker, New York.
The Taliban in Afghanistan say a U.S.-made Black Hawk helicopter crashed during a training exercise in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, killing 3 people. The Ministry of Defense said the crash was due to a technical problem. It said 5 people were also injured. The Taliban took control of some U.S.-made aircraft after they seized the country just over a year ago. It remains unclear how many of those aircraft are operational. U.S. forces deliberately damaged some military hardware as they left, and Afghan forces had flown some helicopters to Central Asian nations. Sweden is holding an election this weekend to elect lawmakers to its 349-seat legislature, as well as to local offices across the nation of 10 million people. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson is fighting to keep her center-left Social Democrats at the helm of a left-wing coalition, but she's facing strong challenges from the right. There are 2 major blocs, one with 4 parties on the left, another with 4 parties on the right, and polls leading up to the election show the 2 blocs in a near tie. Once again, our top story this hour, King Charles III of Great Britain has been officially proclaimed king. Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. Via remote, I'm Diane Roberts. Tens of thousands of mourners lined the route of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral cortege on Sunday as it left the Scottish retreat where she died Thursday to bid farewell to their longest-serving monarch. The hearse carrying the 96-year-old's oak coffin, draped in the royal standard of Scotland, was driven from the Balmoral estate to the capital, Edinburgh. Well-wishers lined the streets, some applauding, some crying, and then they fell silent as the coffin reached the palace of Holyrood House. It was met by senior royals, including the Queen's daughter, Anne, who curtsied as it was carried inside. Her coffin will be held overnight at Holyrood House, the monarch's official residence in Scotland, and on Monday, Charles III will lead it in procession to the nearby St. Giles Cathedral. The White House says U.S. President Joe Biden has formally accepted an invitation to attend the state funeral service of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. He will be accompanied by the First Lady to the September 19th service. In an interview, the Queen's former Royal Protection Officer, Richard Griffin, shared a lot of memories of the Queen. In one, he says he was thrilled she finally came to his retirement party.
So Colin said to her, "Well, of course you can go, Mum. It's your party. You're the hostess. Well, do you think it's okay if I go unannounced?" And of course it was a great thrill because both her, Prince Philip and the other Wessex all turned up at my retirement party and met all my family, so that was probably the highlight of my career, the fact that she did that for me.
A day after his accession ceremony in London, the other countries of Britain, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland officially proclaimed King Charles III as king. A military band marched out of Wales's Cardiff Castle moments after King Charles III was proclaimed king from within the castle gates. Likewise, in Northern Ireland, a ceremony to make Charles's rise to the throne official was treated with royal fanfare and the traditional gun salutes. This is VOA News. Officials in East Ukraine on Sunday blamed Russian attacks on key facilities for widespread blackouts that hit large areas of the country where Kyiv's forces have been making gains in a counter-offensive. The blackouts, which came after Ukrainian forces said they had recaptured dozens of towns and villages in eastern Ukraine, hit regions with pre-war populations of millions of people. The regional governor of the Kharkiv region, where Ukrainian troops have reported the largest gains, said Russian forces had struck critical infrastructure across the region and its main city, also called Kharkiv. China's mass incarceration of Uyghur and other Muslim minorities is not on the UN Human Rights Council's packed agenda for its session starting Monday. However, the controversial policy threatens to overshadow all the other issues to be examined during the Council's month-long session. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA from Geneva.
Human rights activists are clamoring for China to be held accountable for its alleged systematic, widespread abuse of more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. These calls have grown more insistent since the publication, August 31st, of a long-awaited UN report accusing China of torture or ill treatment and other violations that could amount to crimes against humanity. Michelle Bachelet issued the report just minutes before stepping down as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. In departing remarks, she called on the Human Rights Council to keep abreast of the situation in Xinjiang. China's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Chen Zhu, said China will firmly oppose any efforts to use human rights as a political tool to interfere in its internal affairs.
I should say any kind of anti-China actions is again doomed to failure. So in short, we strongly opposing the assessment, the so-called assessment report, and we will strongly opposing any move to move this assessment report to launch any kind of motion or joint actions against us.
Chen said China was ready to establish a working relationship with the newly appointed High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk. However, he said Türk must strictly observe his mandate and conduct business in an impartial, non-politicized manner for that relationship to work. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
And recapping our top story, Queen Elizabeth II's flag-draped coffin is at Holyrood House, the monarch's official residence in Scotland, where it will be held overnight. The coffin slowly processed through the Scottish countryside on a journey from her beloved Balmoral Castle to the Scottish capital